We're delighted to welcome three very special guests to Friern Barnet Library today, all of whom have campaigned in support of libraries throughout the country. Our first guest, Alan Gibbons, is an award-winning children's author and founder of the Campaign for the Book. Alan is an active campaigner for libraries and was instrumental in setting up the National Libraries Day, which is now recognised and celebrated all over the country in February every year. Please welcome Alan Gibbons.
Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think if you want one good illustration of why we need libraries, it was that quiz. Because actually, I mean, do you guys sleep? You know, I mean, it's not very often you walk into people and say, I mean, 1933, some Italian author wrote so and so. I was just gobsmacked. And actually, it does show why we need libraries. The other thing that shows why we need libraries is what we read. Because you think of what was just read. They were idiosyncratic and inspiring, multinational, multicultural, internationalist, men, women, cheeky, rude, groundbreaking. In other words, stories tell us everything you know to be about human. Now, my latest book, and I'm unashamed about advertising my latest book, it's called Hate. This comes out on April the 10th. And the reason I'm highlighting it is a true story. And it indicates two groups of people. One who I suspect are quite likely to go to libraries, and one, sadly, that might just not. There was a young lady, true story, called Sophie Lancaster. Some of you may have heard the incident. Sophie was a 20-year-old student who dressed as a goth. She had her hair in dreadlocks, black and red. She wore black clothing, white makeup, black lipstick. She was beautiful, but she dared to be different. We're all different in our own ways. Because she dressed differently, she was attacked in a Lancashire park by 5 young men who had no investment in society, no investment in education, no investment in learning, no investment in work, and she was kicked to death in a Lancashire park. I met her mum, and I said, can I write a story about this? I wrote a novel, Hate. A guy called Ian Kershaw wrote a play called Porcelain, and Black Roses was written by Simon Armitage, one of the best poets in Britain. And all of us wanted to do something very simple for Sylvia. And that was to say that this mother, in court, do you know what they did? They said she couldn't read her witness statement. The only thing the family has got is a witness statement, to testify, to tell the story, to keep the values of their beloved daughter who believed in peace and marched for peace alive. And the way he kept it alive is to testify. So, okay, the courts didn't give her that justice, but me and Ian Kershaw and Simon Armitage can try to give Sylvia and Sophie and the husband John and the brother Adam justice by testifying. That's what literature does. When you lose a library, you lose the right to tell the truth. You lose the right to testify about the human condition. And that's why libraries are so important. In 2008, a head teacher in Chesterfield decided to close down the school library. This got me annoyed. And she said she was going to close down the library and open up a reading room. Do you know what the difference is? A reading room does not have a librarian. A library without a librarian is a room. It is a vacuous space with books. But there isn't an agent, a gatekeeper that introduces people, that helps them to browse, that gives them information. And so that got me annoyed. And then Doncaster Council decided to cut £832 million from the library budget. Catastrophic. A couple of years later, the coalition government came in, and whatever government came in was going to face these tough choices. I love tough choices. Tough choices are always tough for the people who don't make them. Have you ever noticed this? They're not tough for old Etonians. They've got the money anyway. They're not tough for people who choose to spend £80 billion on Trident missiles rather than finding the money for children's literature. And then the very same people dare to say, look at these kids hanging around on the streets, smashing bus stops. Actually, kids don't. The truth is, if you condemn them to a life without books, without community centres, without Sure Start centres, if you leave our cities as vacuous, empty spaces with no hope, then they will. That's the reality, then they will. And that choice is being made by this government. And I say this government, I don't know what the Eds will do. I'm not very optimistic. However, when I look at what's being done, they're talking about closing 400 libraries in the next year or turning them over to volunteers. I salute you as volunteers, but I'll tell you what, you shouldn't have had to have done it. The library service costs £900 million a year. The whole comprehensive library service, one of the greatest things, probably the second greatest national institution after the founding of the NHS, was the British Public Library Service. Created in 1964, and let's say it again, by a Conservative administration. And now a Conservative administration is in danger of burying the very great educational vehicle, the Public Library Service, no more than 2 miles from your home. They are looking like it's grave diggers, unless we fight incredibly hard. This is scandalous. And there is the money. There's the money I said about in Trident. Maybe if we made people actually pay their tax. I bet everybody in this room pays their tax. But I'll tell you what, if I take you, come and let me take you by the hand through the streets of London, I'll show you something that's going to change your mind. It's called Canary Wharf. And crowding round Canary Wharf, there'll be lots of people who don't pay their tax. I might take you to Parliament, where people fiddle their expenses. I might take you to a place where Mr. Osborne and several other ministers have flipped their houses. We, the ordinary people, you know, we pay our taxes. We pay our taxes so we get things like this. We pay our taxes so we get things like the National Health Service. We want all of us together to progress the human condition in our country. And yet there are some people that sponge off this society, get themselves into high power, and try to tear apart the very public services that made most of us literate and able to answer questions about Kurt Vonnegut in 1969. I think it's important that we turn the whole British population into geeks. I love geeks. I'd like knowledge to be pouring out of people. Now, is it true in this country that children are suffering cranial conditions because of too many books falling in their homes? No, there are too many homes with no books. So too many children underachieve, so it costs a fortune sometimes in the welfare state to subsidise people who can't be productive. This is crazy. Crime because of illiteracy, prison attendance because of illiteracy costs this country a fortune. And let's say another classic piece of idiocy in this country. We make one sort of library statutory in the whole United Kingdom. You all know where it is, don't you? Prison library. The only part of the British society that's got a statutory right to a library is prisoners. Well, here's a little suggestion for the British government. Why don't we make it statutory that you have to preserve every single existing British library with paid librarians, and make it statutory that every school has to have a librarian and a library, and then maybe, just maybe, our communities and our school children would not, through lack of reading, become criminals. The vast majority of people in our prisons are people who are there because they've got special needs, or because they're lacking literacy, or because they've been dumped on the streets after serving in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. That's the 3 reasons you mostly get into prison. There is a good way of staying out of prison: become a banker and steal enough money to ruin the British economy, right? So, essentially, I think our library service is an agent of social progress, of civilization, most of all of empathy. If those young boys who killed Sophie had learned to read well and had read Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird, they would have read one sentence that actually sums it all up, why we need literature. And she says, if you want to understand what's going on in another man's head, it could be another woman's head, you need to wear their skin for a while and walk around in it. Now, if we all read good books, saw great plays, discovered the human condition staring back in the mirror of our own humanity, and that's what public library service does, then maybe there'd be fewer of those feral young men who might feel no sympathy or empathy for a young woman who looks different to them, and maybe those horrible crimes of bigotry wouldn't happen. And that is why I believe the public library service has to be fought for. So absolutely brilliant, you've kept this alive, guys. Apparently I'll be back now to do one of your question times. These places are temples of learning and temples of hope. They're beacons. If we have to, we'll keep it alive with our volunteers. But we must not lose sight of the fact that the British government, by law, is supposed to provide a comprehensive and efficient library service. Our brothers and sisters in Lincolnshire are taking the Tory council there to court. I wish them all their luck. The fight goes on. Thank you.